Welcome to HCD's Mindset Podcast, the go-to destination for all things behavioral science, neuromarketing, and consumer research. I'm your host, Michelle Nigella, and I'm thrilled to have you joining us today for a conversation that's sure to spark your curiosity and leave you with a wealth of insights. In today's episode, we speak with HCD consultant Idlir Proseku, who specializes in strategic foresight and is a self-proclaimed data nerd. Join us as we dive into Idler's wealth of experience in analytics, strategy, market research, and AI. Now, before we dive into a quick call to action to take a moment to like and subscribe this podcast so you never miss an episode. And also a reminder to check out more resources available like white papers, conference presentations, and other great content on our website, www.hcdi.net. So let's get going. Whether you're commuting, working out, or just relaxing, let's embark on another journey of knowledge and discovery right here on HCD's Mindset. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to an episode of Mindset, where I'm super excited because I get to talk to an old friend of mine that I've reconnected with, Idlir. Idlir, can you introduce yourself?
Okay, my name is Idlir. I am originally from Albania, but I have lived most of my life between the US and Canada. And I currently reside in Toronto, Canada, where I'm also teaching at a local college business courses. So it's kind of short intro but about myself, but yes, and of course we want to produce together too. So
so it's interesting, we reconnected recently, and I often think we're recording this at the end of 2023, but this will be introduced in probably early 2024, but I want to give a little bit of background on how we reconnected, and it's because yes, we knew each other almost 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
Back in school. I was in grad school. I think you were undergrad at the time.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because you reached out to me, because it turned out after all these years that we really do have a lot in common professionally, not only, in all the fun that we had in school, but, that there are areas where, our worlds have kind of aligned. And we kind of saw that on LinkedIn, right? Where I'm posting stuff, you're posting stuff, and there seem to be some similarities and interest.
Synergy,
yeah. So tell me, what is it that, like you reached out to me and we had some conversations, but what kind of triggered you?
So if I remember back then, I remember that you were doing graduate school and your psychology and research and so forth, but I didn't put much stock to that. So okay, Michelle is doing that, and I was undergrad business, and I was my last year, and then throughout my life, I started working for major international organizations, USAID, World Vision, and whatnot. We did a lot of market research, right? And then fast forward a few 20 years literally, and I started posting a lot of things on market research because a big area of my life was marketing research, right? And then you're doing the same thing, and so when you started posting, I was like, yeah, what is Michelle doing? And I think there is a lot of like things that were interesting, right? And then in my mind I was like, man, I got to write to Michelle to connect.
Yeah.
And when I started seeing your post, I was like, okay, this is very interesting. So then when you went to Europe for a conference, and I was also in Europe traveling there, I was like, okay, Michelle, we need to connect. It's been many years. Let's reconnect. And then that's how we started. But it was that topics that we're posting about marketing research, consumer, and all those different things. And as we know, things are changing a lot. So I was like, man, I got to connect with Michelle to see what she's up to. Really, it was no agenda. I was just literally, hey, what are you up to? What are you doing nowadays? So,
well, it's interesting because at the time in psychology, I was really studying a lot of animal behavior, and I was, yes, it was like neurogenetic influences of behavior, but little did I know that at some point I was going to be going into marketing and market research or consumer research. But it makes a lot of sense now when we look back on it, right? That you were in business, but you've gone the route of looking into psychology and looking into things that influence people's behaviors, especially when we want to study it. And so our worlds do merge together, right? So tell me a little bit about that journey. So you finished your bachelor's at Purdue University,
Right.
right?
And
And
so,
then what?
and as I mentioned, I went back to Europe to work after I graduated, say 2003, 2004. And then when I started working for, because I had graduated in the US, like companies or organizations like USAID, it's a great fit because again, I wanted to go back and it's like, what companies do I work for? And naturally, you want to work for something you're familiar with, and vice versa. That, you know, I was a good candidate for them at the time. And the project itself was working with food processors, so it was Land O'Lakes and USA, so it's a development project. And I was working specifically with Land O'Lakes, working with food processors like milk, dairy, and so forth. And a big component of that was studying consumers. So I designed surveys and started learning SPSS, which things I didn't really know at the time. I knew things more conceptually, but I started really doing the nuts and bolts, let's sort of speak, and trying to understand how consumer behavior, right, impacts purchasing, right?
Yeah.
And so that was it. And then later on, I worked for a government agency in an innovation capacity, and then also World Vision International. But again, with World Vision International, we're working with the poor, but yet that's equally important because you need to understand how the poor think, right? There's a lot of psychology, a lot of behavior, and then you're designing programs that benefit the target audience, right? And
What
so
made you want to go back to school and get a graduate degree?
I've always wanted to do some sort of graduate degree. I always found it fascinating, interesting. It was always like in the plans to do. And part of that is I didn't know what to do either, right? So part of that was like, oh, I want to do an MBA, right? And so when I enrolled in the MBA program online, it was much more convenient.
Mm.
And then they had also had a doctoral studies, and then I decided to embark on that journey as well. And then looking back, I mean, I had so much energy, but now I'm like, man, I don't know if I would do it again at this point because it's a lot of work, right? And so you have to be very purposeful. You have to have a
Yeah.
clear purpose as to
So
you
what was your
why.
focus? What was that clear purpose?
So for me, I always wanted to kind of end up into teaching because my family and was a teacher, right? And I've seen my mom always teach, and then she said she always enjoyed it. So naturally, I kind of tried to avoid that because I want to go into business, but I think it was natural for me to go into that. And then when I finished my doctoral studies, I focused in strategic foresight, right? And strategic foresight, it sounds like a big term, but it's basically like, you know, coming up, looking at current trends to see how it can impact the future, but yet you prepare now, so you take advantages of others trends, or you protect yourself as well.
And
And
when
so that
we
was pretty fast.
reconnected, yeah, that really pricked my ears, right? Because you said strategic foresight. And it's really interesting because that's something that I've heard more and more often. Um, I've been meeting more and more people that have that role, have that title of being a foresight person or a
Foresight, yeah.
futurist. And so when you said that's what you were doing now, I was really intrigued because I wanted to talk to someone, you know, that I know pretty well to find that I can really ask those questions to. Because I think a lot of times when people hear that term, that title, they're kind of confused because futurism sounds like almost like a little bit wonky, right? Because it's
Right,
like,
right,
what does
exactly.
that even mean? So tell me, what does futurism mean?
Well, so I would say, like, why do we want to study the future, really?
Yeah.
And basically, it's the same thing as why do we want to study the past, right?
Mm.
What do we want to learn? And when it comes to the future, it's not that we cannot predict the future. Let's get it out there. We cannot predict the future. However, we can learn from the current trends, learning how things are going in the past, and then in a way, let's say extrapolate, but develop scenarios. So let's say, okay, in which direction do we want to go, right? And
Yeah.
so we sort of more like plotting the direction, and then it's what is it? It doesn't have to be exact, but it really prepares us mentally with those sort of strategic choices as the future starts sort of becoming a reality, right? And then
Yeah.
sometimes that scenario that we had planned is not a reality at all, and that's totally okay. But again, it makes us think about, like, you know, what are the current trends? How can we change the current situation in the future, right? So we sort of prepare, right? I like to think of it as, and a lot of times in our foresight practice, or we use this painting from a Japanese, old Japanese painting, where there's this big wave coming, right?
Right.
And so there's different types of, so do you want to wait until the wave comes? Do you want to prepare for that wave, or do you want to just be reactive to what's coming, right?
Right.
And so a lot of people, it's difficult to actually teach and engage businesses in foresight, because it's really difficult to actually, in my opinion, from what I've observed, to articulate the value, and especially monetarily, what it brings to the company, right? So again, it might not be like at the bottom line right now. However, any introduction of a major trend or some sort of market force that it just happens right away, it can completely destroy your business model. And this is
Yeah.
what is actually happening right now. A lot of people, when I go through LinkedIn, I'm observing a lot of fear type questions, like, oh, what's going to happen to my job? AI is changing this. So everybody's somewhat not confused, but there's a lot of noise out there. And so how do you prepare for what's to come? And you go through that process of preparation and develop scenarios. At least I guess it's one technique, right? So,
And that is like the $1,000,000 question. I think, to kind of boil it down really simply for clients that we tend to work with, they always want to be able to, I mean, the big question is being able to predict purchase, right?
right.
So on a very like molecular level, what they would like to know is that if I come up with this innovation, is anybody going to buy it?
Right.
Or if I have this product, next year, is anybody going to purchase it? What do I need to consider, right? And so everybody's trying to find the right research that they can do, this magical test that they can run, a piece of gear they can put on someone that can read their mind to find out whether or not they can predict the success of a product. But that's at a molecular level. What you're kind of talking about, and you call it strategic foresight, because it is more about overall company strategy. Do you see like a real difference between that sort of molecular level and that sort of like grander macro level?
Well, so one thing, when it comes to, when we're saying strategic foresight, it could be between 5 to 10 years or 20 years. So
Yeah.
it's not for tomorrow, let's say. It's not for the next 6 months. And so we, again, what future do you want, and how plausible, how real can the future sort of become a reality, right? And then we don't know that, right? We don't know. And that's why I think movies do a great job at designing stories, right? So for example, let's look back in the 1980s and 90s. I think whenever the movie Terminator came out, right?
Yeah.
It was so far-fetched. It was just like amazing, right? But now here we are, we're talking about designing robots, artificial intelligence, how that's gonna, what's gonna happen to us, right? And so we, back then, I mean, again, it's just a future, right? Whether it's going to materialize or not, we have no idea. But I think the key is, one is, this has to be continuous, right? It has to be continuous process. You cannot just do it one time and stop, right? As you might know, we have this, there's this term called black swan event.
Yeah.
So for example, as swans are typically white, but then once it's a very rare event that can happen in the environment, but then the probability of that happening is very low, but the impact could be very high. So like, say a terrorist attack is a very slow, or it's a probability of happening is somewhat low, but yet the impact could be very high, right? Again, that's just an example, but there could be other events like that. For example, the introduction of artificial intelligence just last year, right? OpenAI. Now we're understanding what's going on. How can we use it, right? So it's really made people think a lot about their future, right? Future careers, future jobs, what's going to be disappearing, what's going to be appearing, right? So people are still, or professionals still, like trying to figure that out. So
it's interesting you say that it's a continuous process, and I want to sit on that for a second, because I think a lot of times people bring in futurists or strategic foresight people as a consultant, and they bring them in maybe once, right?
Right.
To do some sort of training or do some sort of exercise to come up with scenarios of where the company should go, right?
Right.
But you're saying it really should be, and I've even participated in that in previous lives with companies that I've worked with. They've brought in like a big consultant to come in and help us come up with innovative strategies, right?
Right.
But we never saw those people again. But you're saying it should be a continuous process. How do you think that there should be like maybe in-house foresight people, or is this something that is more of a consultant basis, or what do you mean by continuous?
So it's interesting because this goes into a lot of different areas, and there's a great organization, the Association of Professional Futurists, and from the conversations I've had with them, one of my professors that is part of the organization, and other futurists that are out there, in a way, we're fighting for our sort of domain, to establish our domain, because there's no such thing as it's difficult to say, oh, I'm hiring a futurist, right?
Yeah,
What
yeah,
is it? What does it mean?
yeah,
Right. And so again, that's language of how we are branded, right? And again, it's like, in my opinion, from what I've observed, is like, how do you articulate the value to businesses so
yeah,
that, oh yeah, this is worthwhile, right? Again, I think comes back to, so you can take many forms, whether it's in a consulting basis or whether it's an like a permanent position, right? And then obviously, depending how big the company is, right? If for a small company, maybe it will not make much more sense, just because the resources maybe are limited, right? But for a big company, as a lot of futurists would say, like Shell and Disney, they're thinking about the future of future of work. Or, for example, I know there is one person that I know at Upwork. They started the she's talking about the future of work. How does it, what is that, right? And that's in a permanent position in a big organization. So
yeah,
I would say it would depend on the resources the company has and the value they want to extract out of it and go from there. Now, on the other hand, as well, there is resistance to change when it comes to this kind of things. Huge resistance to change. So again, I've talked to one business person one time. They had a smaller company, and when I talked about this, it was like talking to, I don't know, there was like, they went blank, right? It's like, okay, I don't need this, right?
right.
But in my mind, it's like, you need this, right? And so
Maybe even more so when you're a smaller company trying to fight for your space, right?
exactly. But yet again, how do you articulate the value?
Yeah.
And I think that's very important when your
It is
business
something I
model,
noticed on your LinkedIn, that you call
right?
yourself a value addict.
Yeah, value. I've been embarking because I'm teaching right now. A lot of times I ask my students, how do you, for example, how do you articulate your value?
Mm,
What is value? What do you bring to the table, right? And I think and I've had a big challenge when I was a few years ago, articulating the value, right? And what is
yeah,
valuable?
yeah,
What is value, whether to me as a person bringing to you as an employee, as an employer, or even in a normal relationship, right? We're all providing some sort of value. So what
yeah,
is that? And to articulate that clearly is extremely important. So, and I think this is where it comes with futures as well, like future
yeah.
studies and
Because it really, like, yeah, I think one thing that we struggle with as consumer researchers is that we're very data focused, right? And you get your numbers and you say, oh, this one is better liked, right?
exactly.
So you have, what happened, right, is the
Yeah,
data. But then the next big question is, so what?
exactly. What's the implication? Yeah,
Yeah, what does it mean? So people liked product A more than product B, so what? What does that mean overall? And I think that's where I can see where our worlds kind of align with, futurism or foresight and behavioral sciences, which is what I kind of call like the area that we kind of sit in, which is that integration of neuroscience and psychology to really understand human behavior. So when you think about that from your viewpoint, and so the sort of hurdles that people have to overcome,
hmm
I think that there's a lot of alignment there. Now, you were talking about coming into a company and saying, you need this. Well, with you said there could be a bit of a hurdle with sort of the terminology that's used when you call it foresight or when you call it futurism, and maybe it's off-putting to some people. What qualifies somebody to be a futurist? So how
Oh,
can you decide that I am now going to label myself
futurist.
as a
Oh.
futurist and I'm going to go, is it being part of the society? Is there a special degree? Like, how did you get there?
No, I mean anybody can engage in. You don't have to have a degree. Of course, there is the techniques, the tools, scenario planning, horizon scanning. There are certain tools that visioning, right? There's certain tools that all say futurists are Delphi methods and so forth to understand. You can implement, right? But then again, who do you call a futurist? I mean, I wouldn't call myself a futurist, right?
Okay.
And that's because by choice. I feel, I'll say I'm not qualified, but uh, you know, I wouldn't call myself a futurist, right? But again, I would say somebody that you have to be in the field and continuously exploring and asking yourself, how would these trends impact the future, and then kind of start visioning out there what's going to happen. And I think, but it's going to be, it's not like a 1 year process. It has to be again continuous engagement with these topics, and I think maybe then we can earn a title of futures. But again, this is a very difficult question, and I don't think.
What would a futurist do or a strategic foresight person do when they sit down with that client? What is that first step in, what kind of methodologies are you using? Just, so people can understand a little bit better.
Right. Now, for example, one of the things that I like to do is understand their goals, or where are they right now, what's happening, right? And then we can go through a very simple trend exercise. Okay, let's see, okay, what potential trends could impact your business model? I think that's one of the most common questions I get when I speak with business owners is this: how can this business model or this trend impact your business model? Could it impact your business model, right? And then let's go through that conversation to see, because maybe by next year you might cease to exist, right? And so what do you do today, and how you can protect, say, let's say your turf to actually continue and to exist and serve your potential customer. So that's one exercise. The other one is visioning. It's like, where do you want to be in 5 to 10, 20 years? Okay. And there's other tools. And one of my favorite things I actually have my students do, I say, ask your 80-year-old self to write a letter to your, say, 20-year-old self today. What would they write, right? And then again, it's exploring those assumptions, right? And this implication of those current trends. And I think it's very important to do that. So starting with that simple exercise, it's a great way. And then one of the most important things is to get everybody involved, right? Not only the CEO, or not, maybe senior managers, C-level, right? And then it's important for nobody to have titles in there, because you want to have that expression of free opportunity for everybody to actually contribute, right? I think that's very important.
Yeah. So you make these sort of trend analyses of sorts, like this layout of possible futures. And you're saying this is a continuous process. So you make these in a first step, or at least lay out some groundwork. What happens next? Let's say like a year down the line or 2 years down the line. How do you maintain this? What do you do with this information?
Now, what do you do? It's a great question. So what I would say to that is, let's say we develop some scenarios, right? So maybe 3-4 scenarios. Okay. Then going, say, a year later, you evaluate which of the scenarios is really coming to pass or becoming a reality, or we're going towards closer to that scenario, right? Again, maybe we're not perfectly close to that scenario, but in what direction are we heading? And then let's start making adjustments and changing, so that we can actually make sure that we continue to exist, right? And to actually maybe we need to adjust the business model, right? So I think that's how I would approach it. I think it's extremely helpful. But this is where also innovation comes in.
Yeah.
Right. What are the things that we're innovating that the market will observe, and meaning that is commercialized, so people buy it? And I think that's the key to that. So And it's a process. It's a continuous process of adjusting and learning, and I think
Yeah.
it's very important. Equally to that, when it comes to leadership, the leadership should actually. It's important that to give everybody the capacity and the freedom to learn and
Mm.
to fail and then go from there, because everybody should be participants in this process of change, right? It's not just one person, or it doesn't have to be, but the right culture also has to be there as well. So now we're talking about change management. So there's a lot of different aspects that come to play over here.
Yeah, because it might not actually be that the scenarios have anything to do with, product spaces, so if you're a large CPG company, perhaps you can use it to inform some of the directions you want to go with your innovations,
Right.
but perhaps it really is about your organization as well.
Of course, 100%. I would say that, of course, the organization has a lot to do on how they approach this component of change. Otherwise, again, what I've seen as well, people and organizations end up responding or reacting to those changes,
Yeah.
but then that might be too late.
Mm-hmm.
And the resources might be limited, and you may end up firing people, et cetera, et cetera. So it becomes harder and more painful as well. Okay, so that's why I'm a big fan of prepare now, and that, hey, things might not work out, but again, you're preparing, instead of just reacting. I think reacting, it's much more stressful,
Yeah.
and a much more likelihood of failure than preparing, of course, if you
It's
to
certainly less innovative.
yeah. I mean, again, it has to be a continuous process, right? Sometimes we call it strategic conversations, right? And where we're going. And I think, again, keeping up with those trends, very important. And we have also mega trends, and there's out there futurists that actually come up with this, and there's called the author escapes my mind, but there's this mega trends map, and that shows how all these mega trends collide with each other, right? And then where do you fit in the big picture? Ironically enough, several years ago, I did a workshop for Deloitte here in Canada, and I put down as a potential change, okay, that is like a potentially entering in the market, was the Cold War, let's say economic Cold War between Russia and the West. Back then, there wasn't a possibility. That's what we thought. A year later, or a year and a half later, it actually happened. So then again, how do you react to that, or do you like, oh, you know what, I kind of understand what is the implications or the impact right away, and that's you are much better prepared to protect yourself and adjust to those changes in the market. I think
But importantly, it's not like you are suggesting in any way that people are predicting the future.
no.
It's more just coming up with potential scenarios and finding the best ways to be adaptive, right?
Exactly. And again, we cannot predict the future. If we're trying to predict the future, it is a failed game right away. So please, let's not let's not.
Yeah, exactly.
Otherwise, I'd be very, very, very rich, and I'll be. But it's not about predicting the future. It's not about predicting the future, but it's about preparing what is about to emerge and what could be emerging in the market, and then how we prepare for that, right?
So
But
what are some
again,
trends you see now, I guess?
well, obviously the big AI trend is huge, and I've been monitoring basically since day one when OpenAI came into market, and I have seen entrepreneurs basically fire all their teams, and they're actually doing everything themselves. So, and I have a favorite quote from one of the entrepreneurs that I follow, and he said, "I don't even have to say thank you anymore, because he's able to be much more productive." And I think AI is becoming a game changer. So you have this thing now called solopreneur. So because a one person team can literally provide as much value and productivity with AI tools.
Oh, that's interesting, because I'm seeing a lot of that now with, a lot of the layoffs that have happened. I'm seeing a lot of those people that I've known sort of branch out on their own as consultants, and
Right.
they probably can because they have these virtual assistants. When it comes to saying thank you, though, I mean, I've seen enough sci-fi movies, to know that you probably should thank your AI, because hopefully if there were anything to happen, maybe it'll remember that, oh, Michelle, she always said thank you and please,
But look, are we heading towards a future where we have to actually say thank you to a machine? and the machine learns that and says, oh, thank you back. Or I mean, again, it is plausible. I don't say it's completely right. And then well, do you measure that? How many times you say thank you? Again, it sounds silly, but how do you
I
use
would
that
be
data?
really curious. People use, I mean, this is a question for, Chat GPT or Bing or whatever it is that people are using. I mean, it's easy enough for someone to fish in there and find out how many people are being polite to their AI virtual assistant.
Right, and then again, I don't want to become political here, but I mean, you can. There's also part of this the ethics of artificial intelligence, and how do you use that, right? And what could be used against? It could be used against you as a citizen, as an employee, right? And so that's another component, the huge area of ethics, and how do we deal with that? And I know Canada, for example, is actually coming up with legislation to govern AI. Okay. There is other discussions out there in the European Union, right? So that's going to be very interesting to see how that actually.
And that's exactly what a futurist or a foresight person would want to do. You would see these trends and you would try to map out directions it could possibly go, because it could go towards trying to be more regulated, or perhaps it could, just be a free for all. It's the cat's already out of the bag. Now, how do we handle this? And talking with a company to then help them plan around that. How are you going to deal with the fact that AI is here, and what do we do next?
Now, one thing I'd like to say on that, on when regards to adopting AI for your company, for your practice, you have to understand your processes. A lot of what I see, a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs aren't, well, not necessarily entrepreneurs, but a lot of people want to dive into AI, but they don't understand that their process actually and the outcome that process leads to. So one really has to understand the process, what AI tool can do for them. If you understand the process, then great, adapt or start talking about adapting that. But otherwise, just simply, oh, AI, like, well, how are we going to use that? Well, let's start understanding first the process that you're actually going through and seeing how AI can actually benefit your company or your one-man company, right? And so I think that's very important. So
because that again is what that strategic part is of planning, like really trying to lay out the groundwork for how you should be responding, right?
Part of that, yes. Again, how do we want to what do we want to do? There's this case study that there's this bank in Singapore that was really one of the sort of like worst performing when it comes to customer service. And then I'm sorry, and the name escapes my mind, but and then the leader of the company basically turned everybody into a data scientist or data citizen, I believe that was the term. And so nobody got fired, but everybody started coming up with projects and ways to implement their AI or their technology into better serving the customers. Now the bank is one of the top performing banks out there in Asia. So, and that's basically because leadership allowed them to experiment, fail, right? And that's also part of that. And they understood the processes, right? And then everybody became a data citizen, which is
interesting.
It's just very interesting case study. And I think that's what we're going through, right? So
yeah, interesting. I'm so glad that we've been able to talk about this a bit, and I know that we are planning on having more conversations perhaps on AI and its uses in sort of design thinking and etc. So everybody look forward to more conversations. I do want to touch on that a lot of our history together, when we look back in history, has been around tango. And for those who don't know, and I may have mentioned it at one point before, but I used to lead a group at Purdue University that was the Argentine tango group, and we did lessons and we did dances together, and Idlir was a great dancer. And there's photo evidence of this, and I'm going to post it to our LinkedIn so everybody can see how amazing we looked 20 years ago. But also that it is something that happened, and it's really great to be able to stay in touch with people and reconnect on things, both professionally and just through interests. And I think that's just really cool. Speaking of having agency, I think that Argentine tango is one of those things where both dancers it's very creative and open, and everybody has, like, you just follow the music Maybe that is kind of like what you're talking about with this Singapore bank example, where you kind of free up the whole ballroom dancing thing. Ballroom dancing is very strict and regimented, but in
Right.
Argentine tango, it was very fluid and following the music and being
Things.
creative and allowing both dancers, not just a leader and a follower, but it's like
Yeah.
a communication, right?
No, again, we can use tango as an analogy to how things change, right? And I I I learned a lot, but then once I started listening to the music and learning how to dance to the beat, then I started developing my own brand, so to speak, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then it was very unique. And then I think obviously that led to having some great relationships as well, because I still keep in touch with some of the people from that group, and obviously
And here
casting
we
forward,
are.
yeah, here we are. So, but one thing I wanted to kind of really quickly touch base on that AI is just only one market force, right? That it's
Yeah,
actually impacting, but there's other forces out there. Again, how is this force or market force actually changing, impacting the world? And I think this is but
yeah,
again, AI is one of them, right?
yeah.
And it has many other implications. And one tool for that is called the futurism wheel, where we put the change in the market and then see how we can branch it out to other changes that is happening in the environment, potentially could impact our company and things like that. So
It
again,
sounds really fun.
no,
And exciting
it's a
exercise.
great. Every time I've done these workshops, it's a great way to get everybody involved. It's a fun environment, and it opens people's up minds to what
Yeah.
could be possible. And I think that's again, it's not going to be, maybe it's not a reality, but again, it could be. It could be plausible, right? So
Yeah. And it is about preparation. So
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. Let's just prepare. That's why I say it has to be a continuous process. And then again, not maybe daily, but every so often, right? Every 6 months, a year. So it's like, let's just see where we are, and this is what has changed and so forth. So
Yeah.
but yeah, going back to Tonga, that's fantastic. I still miss it. I still remember a lot of good times,
Yeah.
it's one of those things that it removes me from the daily work of teaching or whatnot, and opens up my mind to other things. And I think that's where you see, I've actually used tango a lot of times in my analogies when I teach it.
Hmm.
And it's great. So doing completely something different
Yeah.
is usually very beneficial to other areas of you, whether it's your work and your life as well. So it's very beneficial for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm loving this conversation, but we're going to wrap it up a little bit, and we're going to continue conversations in other episodes. But for now, I want to do the exercise of free association that we do. Catherine used to call it react attack. I just call it free association. I'm going to give you 10 words, and I don't want you to think too hard about it. Just tell me the first thing that comes to your mind. You ready?
Yeah, this kind of reminds me. There's an old movie called The Dirty Dozen, and also the James Bond, and they're playing that game, and so it's very interesting. Okay, I'm ready.
It's fun, right? Okay, future.
Okay, future, opportunity,
Purdue.
tango,
Marketing.
uh, behavior,
Tango.
Argentina,
Consumers.
changing,
Insight.
practical,
Innovation.
value,
Strategy.
future,
Milonga.
uh, cool,
And because we'll be airing this in the new year.
amazing.
Awesome. That was good. So thank you so much, Idlir. I've had a really great time catching up with you and hearing more about foresight and futurism and insights and innovation. This is a great conversation. Looking forward to more. I want to thank everybody for joining us. And we have more episodes to come out, so stay tuned.
Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it.